The Young and the Restless spoilers. The Claire Newman story arc in The Young and the Restless has taken a shocking and psychologically layered turn, one that feels like a collision between old family sins and new betrayals. Once seen as a fragile, remorseful young woman desperate for redemption, Claire has become something far darker, and her descent into cruelty seems to have been set in motion long before Los Angeles ever entered the picture. When Claire first fell in love with Kyle Abbott, their relationship symbolized healing, a bridge between two powerful families long burdened by legacy and loss. She loved him without calculation, and her warmth seemed to steady him during a chaotic time. But that love has now curdled into venom, and what began as devotion has twisted into vengeance. The question haunting fans is, why? How did unconditional love mutate into a desire to make Kyle suffer? The answer lies, perhaps, in Los Angeles, and in Jordan, the mysterious woman who shaped Claire's worldview long before Genoa City learned her name. After months of rumors, it's becoming increasingly clear that Jordan didn't just influence Claire, she engineered her. LA wasn't a fresh start, it was an indoctrination. Jordan took the wounded, impressionable Claire and remade her in her image, cold, manipulative, unafraid of moral boundaries. The compassion we once saw in Claire was real, but it's been buried beneath years of emotional conditioning. Jordan taught her that love is weakness and control is survival. Now, back in Kyle's orbit, Claire is using that lesson with precision. Her actions are not impulsive, they're strategic. Sleeping with Holden Novak wasn't about passion, it was about power. Holden isn't new to her life, they share a history that predates her involvement with Kyle. Their relationship is transactional, built on shared ambition and mutual benefit. Holden provides the danger and defiance that feed her rebellion, while Claire provides the emotional leverage he craves. Together, they're the kind of couple that thrives on chaos. When Claire declared she wanted to become pregnant by Holden, it was both a provocation and a weapon. It was her way of erasing Kyle, of ensuring that his hold on her would never be resurrected. By carrying another man's child, she's not just severing emotional ties, she's rewriting her own narrative. It's revenge disguised as liberation. Yet the irony is cruel. The more she tries to free herself from the pain Kyle caused, the more she mirrors the manipulative patterns of those who hurt her. Meanwhile, Victoria Newman is watching in horror as her daughter spirals deeper into self-destruction. To Victoria, Claire's behavior doesn't read as empowerment, it reads as entrapment. She sees Holden as a predator, exploiting Claire's vulnerabilities for his own gain. The idea that her daughter might be pregnant terrifies her, not because of public scandal, but because it means Jordan's influence may have destroyed Claire's ability to distinguish love from control. Victoria's instincts tell her something isn't right, and she's preparing to intervene, whether Claire wants her help or not. But here's where the story turns even more dangerous, the paternity of the pregnancy. Claire's claim that the baby is Holden's seems too convenient, too confidently declared. Those who've followed her history know that truth and performance often blur in her world. Given the timeline of her reunion with Kyle and her entanglement with Holden, the possibility that Kyle is the biological father cannot be dismissed. If that's true, the implications are explosive. It would mean that, despite all her cruelty, all her proclamations of independence, Claire will remain forever tied to the man she claims to despise. If the baby is Holden's, Claire's story becomes one of tragic defiance, a woman trying to destroy the last remnants of a love she couldn't control. But if the baby is Kyle's, then it becomes a gothic twist in the Abbott-Newman saga, a child born of hate, revenge, and bloodlines too tangled to escape. Either way, the emotional fallout will reach across Genoa City. Victoria's growing involvement sets the stage for a mother-daughter confrontation unlike any we've seen in years. Victoria will likely move to protect her daughter at any cost, perhaps even against the Newman empire itself, while Kyle, driven by rage and confusion, could cross lines he once swore he never would. Holden, ever the opportunist, might use the pregnancy, whoever's child it is, as leverage in his ongoing feud with Kyle and the Abbotts. Ultimately, Claire's pregnancy isn't just another twist, it's the catalyst for the next great Newman-Abbott war. Her transformation from victim to villain isn't random, it's generational. She's inherited the worst of both families, Victor's ruthlessness, Nikki's defiance, Victoria's stubborn pride, and the Abbott's capacity for self-destruction. And as she stands in front of the mirror, touching her stomach with that faint, knowing smile, one thing becomes chillingly clear: whether the baby belongs to Kyle or Holden, Claire's revenge is only beginning. Kyle stopped chasing the storm the moment he realized the storm was chasing him back. The weeks of denial, the reflexive defense of a romance he believed could be mended, the compulsive rereading of old messages and the nightly arguments with ghosts all burned off like fog under bright noon heat the day he understood the shape of Claire's plan. The point had never been reconciliation, the point had been pain. Her cool silences, the calculated timing of her appearances, the way she seemed to measure his every word for leverage rather than meaning, none of it was an accident. Somewhere between Genoa City and Los Angeles, the woman who once pressed hope into his palms like a promise had learned to turn hope into a weapon. Kyle did not announce this revelation or perform it, he simply allowed it to reorder him. He stopped composing speeches she would never hear and started making lists that actually mattered. Every morning he rose before dawn, packed Harrison's lunch, signed school slips, checked on a science project about photosynthesis, and scheduled a meeting with legal about insulating Jabot from another round of Newman mischief. He was not cruel and he was not numb, he was something rarer for a man with his last name, Claire. If someone wanted to stay, he would meet them halfway and then some. If someone preferred the theater of betrayal, he would not play audience. The center of his life became small on purpose: his son, his father, the company that carried his grandfather's scent in the boardroom wood. He did not slam doors, he locked them. He did not beg, he built. And somewhere deep in the building, the ache for Claire, still real and sharp, became a quiet room he could enter and exit without getting lost. Across the city, in a Los Angeles suite that looked like a magazine advertisement for a life curated to impress strangers, Claire rehearsed the one script she believed would solve everything. The late-night text became a midday invitation, became a drink poured too quickly as if speed could outpace dread. When Holden arrived, handsome and unbothered in the way men look when they mistake charisma for character, she delivered the news without tremor. She was pregnant. She expected a shift in the air, the sudden gravity of consequence pulling them both closer to earth, but what arrived first was an absence, a beat too long before he answered, a smile that belonged to a photo shoot rather than a hospital waiting room, the tonal mismatch of congratulations arranged like decor across a sentence that died on the table between them. He didn't want to be a father, not now, not while deals were pending and endorsements whispered his name and her family's last name trailed her like a paparazzo in every room one can't escape. He did not say the word burden, but the word spoke anyway. He recommended time, then options, then secrecy, then logistics that treated a heartbeat like an inconvenience and her body like an obstacle course. In his mind this was strategy, in hers it was a translation error so profound it cracked the foundation. She saw, with a clarity that arrived like fever-breaking, the ledger of their history written in unearned confidence, the nights that felt like rebellion, the mornings that felt like erasure, the way he always asked what she could do for his freedom and never what he could do for her future. Jordan's old lessons, the ones that taught her love is leverage and leverage is survival, tried to rally in her bloodstream. They had rescued her once by hardening her. But now, staring at Holden's careful distance, she discovered the problem with armor: you can't feel the wound until it's already taken the limb. She was angry first, then offended, then briefly terrified by the silence she heard inside her own chest, and finally furious at herself for confusing danger with devotion. He left with a schedule, she stayed with a life. When Kyle and Claire finally met, it wasn't in some grand public arena or under the punishing glare of a boardroom chandelier. They met in a nowhere corridor that hospitals specialize in, a corridor that smells like antiseptic and old promises. He didn't raise his voice. He did not inventory her recent betrayals as if points could be redeemed. He simply told her that whatever game she had been playing with Holden and Audra had run out of table. He knew about the dinners that required deniability, the messages sent at hours nobody respectable texts, the photo she pretended not to see because seeing would require choosing, the rumor she had seeded to force him into confession. He told her he understood the human appetite for control and the way pain masquerades as proof, but he would not be rented by a story that needed a villain to validate its author. He said he would pour his time into the people who could hold it without breaking the glass, into Harrison's endless questions and Jack's stubborn optimism and the Aunt Tracy brand of mercy that keeps a family from becoming a collection of matching grudges. He would protect Jabot because his grandfather expected it and because the city needs at least one institution where loyalty is more than a slogan. He told her, without cruelty, to stop using the rubble as decor. Then he stepped aside and let the corridor return to its original job of being a corridor, not a theater for the kind of scenes that leave everyone worse. Claire said little, because there is very little a person can say when the machine they have been cranking for months suddenly stops making noise. She left with a face engineered for victory but carrying the weight of a draw. Holden was not waiting at her door when she returned. His absence registered less as a surprise than as a confirmation of the diagnosis she had refused to write down. The next morning brought the crosstalk of coverage, an online thread parsing her expression at a charity gala as if pixels can adjudicate character, a whisper across town that she was trying to engineer permanence with a temporary man. Victoria called not to scold but to anchor, offering doctors and discretion and the kind of maternal advocacy that has rescued Newman heirs from burning down their lives for less. Claire accepted the appointment and rejected the pity, a choreography she learned young. By afternoon she returned to Holden's, an apology rehearsed and a boundary drafted, ready to negotiate presence if not partnership, and discovered that negotiation requires a counterpart. He had a meeting. He had 3. He texted a sentence about timing and 2 about press. She waited longer than the dignity of a Dean's List student of survival should allow, then left her own sentence on his counter, unspoken and clear, "You have misread me." The humiliation did not arrive as spectacle. It arrived as logistics. The boutique that had courted her for a campaign shifted their focus to someone less complicated. A stylist who always calls wrote a supportive paragraph that revealed they would not risk being photographed near fallout. A club that had waived fees since forever suddenly remembered policy. People in this town do not want you to fail, they want you elsewhere when you do. Claire felt the city nudge her to edges, and for the first time in a long time she recognized the geography of exile. She walked it in heels and then, when the rage wore off, in flats. She counted the few who stayed, her mother, whose love can read as interference until you are falling, and a nurse with no last name who called her honey in a tone that made the word a blessing rather than a script. In the mirror she examined the face that had gotten her into and out of so much trouble and tried to find the switch that turns cunning back into conscience. People talk about rock bottom as a location. Mostly it is a confession that the story you were telling about yourself is unsustainable. News travels along the old pipes in Genoa City, and within days Kyle had heard what anyone with a laptop and a grudge could piece together. He did not gloat. He did not text something short and lethal. He instructed counsel to prepare for whatever legal storm a man like Holden might summon when cornered by reality, and he asked security to audit the soft doors Audra loves to leave ajar. He took Harrison to the park and cheered a soccer pass that was more enthusiasm than aim. He let Jack ramble about an early Abbott marketing fiasco that ended, like all good family legends, in both humiliation and a lesson. He held Diane's gaze long enough to speak the apology his pride had drafted too many times but never sent. He had let the wrong woman and the wrong wound steer him. That night, when he finally slept, his body remembered what it feels like to rest without waiting for a phone to detonate. He was not naive. He knew Victor had new games and Phyllis would sell a city for applause and Audra could turn desire into currency faster than most people can blink. But he also knew that revenge masquerading as rescue is how men like him lose entire decades. He would not lose another one. Claire's last attempt at salvage looked nothing like a parade. It was a private appointment and a printout and a quiet conversation with a physician who spoke to her as if she were not famous for heartbreak. The early scam was little more than a grainy speculation, but it was enough to collapse the mile-high stack of narratives she had been balancing. On the way out, she did a thing that felt like trespass and courage at once. She called Kyle. Not to manipulate. Not to persuade. Simply to inform him that her life was about to be measured in weeks and trimesters and that ambiguity had moved into the guest room with luggage. She told him the timeline made certainty an honest impossibility. He listened. He asked the practical questions first because that is how a person speaks when he is trying not to bleed in front of you: names of doctors, how she was feeling, what she needed that had zip codes and invoices. Then he said the only thing that was both boundary and bridge: he would not be used again, not by her, not by Holden, not by a story headlined by fear. If paternity testing one day named him, he would be there so completely that the word father would feel understaffed. If it named another, he would wish her health, pay for whatever safety required, and refuse to be the man she could call when she missed power more than kindness. The call ended with no theatrics. She sat in a car that suddenly felt like an elevator between floors in a life she could not recognize and realized that the one man she assumed would crawl had learned to stand. Holden's final exit was exactly on brand: technically polite, legally cautious, emotionally vacant. He sent a document before he sent a dinner invitation, a gesture that told the truth loudly: liability first, care maybe. He did not insist on anything except silence. Claire read the clauses and felt something inside her go very still. This was not tragedy. Tragedy requires grandness. This was transaction. She signed where she had to and left the rest untouched. That night she folded the printed pages into a kitchen drawer that also held takeout menus and a corkscrew and thought about how people store instruments for celebration beside instruments for retreat. She slept badly and woke clear. What remained to be lost happened quickly. 2 friends who were never friends found the exit, the magazines that had loved the mess loved a newer one, and a manager who liked to say family like a benediction discovered the calendar had no room for anything that complicated. It should have broken her more than it did. But when the blast wave passed, she found, to her own surprise, that something she hadn't felt since before Jordan had a name for it returned: quiet. The kind that begins as shame and becomes air. She kept her doctor's appointments. She told Victoria the truth even when it made both of them angrier than is useful. She stopped reading comment sections. She walked. She cried the way exhausted people cry, efficiently. She did not chase Holden. She did not text Kyle at 2 a.m. She began, for the first time in years, to ask herself questions that were not designed to win. Who am I if nobody is watching? Who will I be if nobody is worth punishing? What does it mean to love a child not as a chess move but as a correction? Genoa City adjusted around all of them like a stage crew resetting a set during applause. Victor launched his next precision strike and called it stewardship. Phyllis flirted with disaster because disaster claps loudest. Audra found a new room to own and a new man to make useful and wrote ambition across the doorway in a shade of lipstick that photographs like sin. Jack gathered his family the way some men gather evidence and reminded them that the longer game is the only one that doesn't eat you alive. Kyle kept choosing the small brave things: a reading log signed on time, a board packet sorted before breakfast, a phone set to do not disturb at hours when men addicted to control confuse insomnia with responsibility. He did not check Claire's feeds. He did not plan counterattacks. He fielded a legal memo about contingency if a paternity test one day became paper rather than rumor, signed it, and put it in a drawer labeled if. In a clinic bathed in the unflattering clarity of fluorescent light, Claire sat through another scan and heard a sound that made arguments irrelevant. It did not absolve her. It did not indict anyone else less. It simply drew a line from what she had been to what she might have to become. She left with a photo that would never mean much to anyone but her and took a route home that avoided every place she had pretended to be fearless. On her kitchen counter the document Holden had prioritized waited for instructions. She slid it beneath the tray that held keys and learned, in her hands, what it feels like to put something ugly under something ordinary. She made tea. She called her mother. She said, for the first time, that she was scared and not angry. Victoria cried in a way that mothers cry when they realize the fight is not with them but with the weather, promised to stand in whatever rain arrived, and did not say I told you so. As summer sloped toward headlines about other people, Kyle and Claire became two citizens moving through the same city without orbit. When they finally crossed paths again, it was not an event, it was an errand. He was with Harrison, trading bad puns, looking like a man who had made peace with the narrow, ordinary heroism of showing up. She was alone, holding a paper bag that smelled like bread and basil, looking like a person who had been introduced to humility by name.